Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. If this is your first time here, this is a podcast about political commentary, a sprinkling of philosophy, organizing psychology, revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co-host, MysterE. So, MysterE, how are you going today?
I am very well, 4IS. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm going pretty well. And we're actually dealing with a question that we've got from the Discord today. So, Ollie Atlas asked us in the Discord for the podcast, how would courts work under socialism? So, Ollie Atlas, I completely understand it if you feel like I'm moving away from the original premise of your question, but I kind of wanted to generalize this one a bit and talk about the law, like socialism and the law, or socialism and government, because I kind of feel like if we generalize it a bit, it's got a lot of legs. Because don't get me wrong, I think when you just talk about the general, like say you do legals, you're talking about legal studies. When you actually talk about the separation of powers and, what Ollie Atlas is referring to, the judiciary, the courts is what you consider one arm, and then you have the legislature, which is basically your parliament, and then you have the executive, where probably here in Australia it's a little bit less clear, but it's very clear in your liberal democratic societies like America, where you have the president, and the office that surrounds that is the executive, and then you have Congress, which is the legislature. And I think maybe this question might benefit from a slight tweak, if you will, of how would the law work under socialism? Because I think that's a very interesting question. And look, Ollie Atlas, I really apologize if you wanted to deep dive into the courts one, but I think this is really important, because the law in society, I think people they generally, heuristically or just off the bat, there's kind of assumption that the law and justice, or the law and morality, they're kind of one and the same thing. But, this does happen now and again, and there's been some pretty noticeable scenarios that have happened in 2024 as well as 2025, where morality and the law, or justice and the law, haven't been marrying up in liberal democratic societies. And
Go on.
Okay, well, I want to.
They haven't.
They haven't, and
what?
Yes, I can sense your facetiousness in your tone there. The two, at least, before we go into discussing how would the law work under socialism, I kind of want to discuss the two prominent cases that have happened recently, where it's the Epstein files, as well as the Luigi case of him unaliving the healthcare CEO, or the health insurance CEO, where I think there are two prominent cases where both your left and your right basically put aside their differences in terms of culture wars and all of that, and actually said in unison, no, this definitive action was correct and this one isn't. It just cut through everything. And just to do a brief summary, what I mean by that is, with the Luigi situation, where he unalived the healthcare insurance CEO, where he was denied all of his claims, he had nothing left to do, so he just pops that CEO. The rhetoric that came out of that is, whilst people would have initially said oh well, killing somebody is wrong, but then concurrently what happened with that is, yeah, but the guy kind of deserved it. Like indirectly held all of this insurance from insurance claims from people that was, life affirming healthcare, or life affirming life affirming care that, so people could survive. And like almost like a balancing act, where it's like, well, he indirectly caused all of these deaths, therefore maybe he deserved it. Like there was that those talking points there. And then in the Epstein scenario, there was another talking point that kind of cut through the political spectrum, if you will, where everyone saw that Epstein, with the human trafficking and everyone that was kind of surrounding him in the Epstein saga, it kind of proved that not only was there a rich class, or I guess if you want to use more Marxist terms, a ruling class, but that there was one rule for everyone else and another rule for them. They knew how to manipulate the legal system, and they could get away and do whatever they wanted to. Mm-hmm. And those were talking points that cut through. Like they might have been slightly, I guess, articulated in different ways, but those were the fundamental talking points. And if you're dealing with a system that reinforces, the right of property, or property rights, and it's $1 one vote rather than one person one vote, then well, people can see through the cracks in like those sort of scenarios.
So I think what you're expressing, and where I would take this type of discussion, is along the lines of this idea that what we have at the moment is a bourgeois legal system. And what I have actually made the case of over the last so many months now is that capitalism is actually, or bourgeois society, which is the basis for capitalism, bourgeois society is actually not based on the idea of commerce or merchants. So there's this long understanding that bourgeois culture is actually, it was these rich kind of townspeople, the people that lived in the in urban areas of the medieval and then the later feudal stages, that then sprung up and formed a new society because of the wealth that they had collated, and then that wealth meant that they started to get power. And so many people associate bourgeois society actually with commerce and traders and merchants and people that have got their wealth through their entrepreneurial skill. Now, that might have been the original bourgeois, the very, very original bourgeois, but the merchants that made a name for themselves initially, the original bourgeois entrepreneurs, most of the time they would send their children to actually study law once they became that middle class in a feudal society. And it is the lawyers of the bourgeois that actually invented liberal societies. When you look at bourgeois revolutions all around the world, it's a bunch of lawyers from the middle classes, these merchant classes that have all the money and started to gain all the power. They're the ones that are sitting down structuring bourgeois societies, and ultimately creating these liberal constitutions all around the world. The stuff that we have today. We have the American system with the constitution that hasn't changed ultimately in about 200 years. And then we have like something like the French example, which is up to its like fifth republic now, maybe it's sixth. And so like they constantly revise it, but they always revise it within the context, not of business, but in the context of the law. And so they're creating legal structures that, don't get me wrong, support the business sector primarily and the economy, but they're legal structures nonetheless. And so bourgeois society is actually, I would argue, more about the law than anything else, because it's the legality that holds together a bourgeois society. You hear a lot of people talking at the moment about the idea of whether people respect the rule of law. So like in Trumpian America, Trump 2.0, people are really debating this idea of whether or not Trump is actually respecting the rule of law. And like, is he listening to the court system? Is he listening to the Constitution? Is he listening to the legal framework that constrains the executive's arm of government? Or is he overriding that stuff? And like the Americans constantly, the Israelis constantly at the UN, there is supposedly, a world order based on the rule of law. And the Americans, the Israeli are constantly, basically ignoring the International Court of Justice and the rule of law and all that sort of stuff, or the the rules-based order, that type of rhetoric. And so bourgeois society is heavily structured around basically the legal system. All businesses, their currency, apart from physical currency, like money, their currency is really contract law.
Yes.
Really. And that's the glue and the fabric that holds together a bourgeois society. And so what you're talking about is there is a phenomenon where, and this is not new, and there will be others like this, but like, let's use recent examples like you have, which I think are really important, is that there are legal cases that have come up, or legal issues that have come up, that have actually not split people along cultural war boundaries, which is usually what happens, like things like left and right. But like, it's actually unified different classes to argue the case of the legal point. So let's take the Luigi situation. What you were describing before is that left-wing and right-wing working class people who have all been affected by corporations, insurance companies, and been fucked over by insurance companies, whether they're in the United States or not, but like all around the world, wherever there is health insurance and people have had to rely on the private sector for that, for something, they're just like, well, these corporations do exploit people for a living. And the way that they've exploited people has actually led to much misery and probably uncountable numbers of deaths. And so can you account for that? Can you really say that this action is wholly unjustifiable given the amount of pain, misery, and death that has been brought upon people of the world who are subjected to needing private health insurance? And so like people uniting, and like even, I guess you'd say right-wing thinkers, influencers, pundits were trying to tell their audiences, oh, this is just outrageous. How could you attack a CEO in cold blood? This is against the rules-based order of bourgeois society. And people were like, yeah, okay, we don't condone murder, but like, hey, this CEO's probably killed a lot of people with his decisions. So is there a level of justice here? And so I think we've talked about this phenomenon before 4AS, but people have an acute sense of justice, which is intuitive, versus an acute understanding of the law. And so like you have to be a lawyer and speak legalese to understand the law, but most people can intuit justice. And so what we're describing here is in these cases, the Luigi one in the Epstein files, or as well, or the case with Epstein, where there are people basically preying upon working class people for human trafficking, for, child sex abuse, all of these, grave issues, literally things like getting away with murder. Like the amount of people that have disappeared, or like fallen down the stairs, or, taken their own lives in a hotel room around the whole Epstein saga is incredible. And so like it just showcases that there's a class of people out there, if you have wealth and power, that you can literally get away with things like murder and, human trafficking. And we're all supposed to put up with that? No, I think there's this unified consciousness among the working class, or the working people of the world, everyone who's outside of this bourgeois fantasy world where Epstein and the boys hang out in. And they're just like, no, this is wrong. This is where we draw the line. And if the justice system isn't going to do this, we're all going to call it out, and we're going to expect some type of justice to be served somewhere along the line. And they're calling out political representatives and demanding justice. And so there is a level of justice that can be undertaken via some form of consensus almost in a class of people, an economic class of people that's outside the judicial system. And the judicial system is simply the bourgeois expression of holding the society together without violent force. So without sending in the police every time to brutally assault and enforce the law, you have a judicial system where there's a bunch of regulations out there that are supposed to provide what is appropriate conduct, and everyone follows the rules-based order, and then society should function. And that's the predication of a bourgeois society right there, is a society held together by legal coercion to a certain extent through the legal system and through armies of lawyers. And what we're seeing is that the working class or the working people of the world have their own moral sentiments that do express themselves from time to time and contradict or rub up against or are, in opposition to the bourgeois moral sentiment.
Yes, and really, when it comes down to it, I don't think it's a coincidence that one of the leaders of liberal democratic societies and capitalism itself, America is probably one of the most litigious societies. So, one of the most prominent moments in even the Trump saga from all the way back in 2016 till now is, the whole fallout of what happened in 2020 when his lawyers and him were saying that, Joe Biden winning was, the election was rigged and all of that, and all the litigious behavior that prompted out of that. But let's even take Australia, for example, that sort of litigious behavior, or, somebody winning an argument on a technicality, that even hits closer to home, because I guess a friend of the channel, Friendly Geordies, that happened with his fight against John Barilaro. Because, look, it's been a while since I remember looking into everything that happened with him. But I think one of the most defining aspects of his defamation case with John Barilaro was Jordan had put a truth self-defense of him saying, well, I didn't defame him because everything I said about him was the truth. But John eventually got off on everything based on a gross technicality that everything that Jordan was saying about his character and everything was actually tied to these parliamentary speeches that he made. But politicians have parliamentary privilege. So, whatever they say in the chamber, they can say whatever they want, but anything that they say in the chamber, they, I guess, can't be held accountable for what they say. So Jordan's truth defense couldn't actually happen because what he was saying was the truth was tied to this parliamentary privilege. So, I guess Jordan lost on the technicality, and, the rest is history. So I'm sure if you held that up to the pub test or the sniff test, depending on what you want to call it, if somebody said, well, if somebody performed in allegedly corrupt behavior, and they happened to just say that they did that corrupt behavior openly within the parliament, do you think that is a just law or a just rule? I think a majority of people would turn around to you and say, well, no, I don't really think so. So again, there's another separation between what is just, what is moral, and what the law is.
Yes. And I think in that circumstance, most working people, I guess, people that don't have what the bourgeois really enjoy, which is armies of lawyers, they would look for fairness in the legal system, because not everyone can afford to have a unit or a legal representative on queue at all times, because they can't afford it. And so it's a luxury that's beyond their class means. And so they would look to the system, any type of legal system, to be fair because they're restricted by their financial circumstances. Now, if you thought about what the ruling class, like the bourgeoisie or the upper classes, would have looked like in a feudal society or ancient society, if they wanted protection, they would have had an armed bodyguard. Basically, they would have had bodyguards around them at all times. But like in the bourgeois society, people have lawyers. And like the higher you get, you have an army of lawyers, actually. And whenever anyone does anything that you don't like, you threaten them with legal action. What does Trump do? Like, Trump has security personnel. He has the Secret Service and all that sort of stuff looking after him, but that's paid for by the state for the most part, especially as he's actually president at the moment. He's a sitting president.
Yeah.
So that's definitely funded by the state. Like, what does he have? He has an army of lawyers. And this is Trump 2.0 on steroids at the moment. Every time someone does something that he doesn't like, he doesn't go and break their legs. He sues them. And he's suing people repeatedly at the moment. This is warfare. This is legal warfare. And so a bourgeois system, I think, is actually built around this idea of the weaponization of law to maintain the rule of bourgeois, make things complicated in the legal sense, and then people have to fight it out. But that's the glue that kind of holds society together. And so I would say then, if we were going to argue about, or if we're going to speculate on what the legal system would be like under socialism, I would think then that given like the cases that you brought up, things like Luigi, the case with Luigi and the case with Epstein, I would say that there would have to be some type of democratization of the legal system where, with big matters such as like what's going on with Luigi, such as things like Epstein, those types of cases, those types of precedents, I think people, like, you would actually have to go with the body politic and like go out to people and try and get an understanding of what people's sentiments were and have them included in the process. Now, that is obviously very, very difficult to run an entire legal system and have everybody kind of vote on something and have a referendum every time there's got to be a decision made on something. But the bourgeois ideal of the judicial system, which is to protect the bourgeois class and people who can afford to fight in the legal system, that would have to disappear. So the democratization of the legal system might not just be getting everyone in on every decision, because that's probably logistically, that'd be a fucking nightmare, but taking out the financial angle of the legal system would be a place that I would start if I was going to have, a judicial system that was done like socialism, quote unquote, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Because the people that fight, like John Barilaro, for example, if you're going to use that example that you're using, John Barilaro as a politician and as someone that has, feathered their nest nicely, they have a legal team and they have the resources to fight people in court. Like Jordan was also taken to court for defamation by
Clive Palmer.
And Clive Palmer is a billionaire, right?
Yeah.
Or a multi-millionaire at least. Multi-millionaire. And so like as soon as he didn't like what Jordan did, what did he do? He sued him. Court, He sued him for defamation.
Yeah.
He litigated. And he's like, this will destroy him. And he was hoping that just dragging him through the courts would destroy him. So this is how the bourgeois use the court system, because it's financial warfare. And so like the average person out there can't do that. And if like they're intimidated by the court system, they'll keep their mouth shut. And so that's a form of suppression. It's a form of oppression indirectly. And so you would have to make the legal system socialized in that sense, where everybody has the right to the same legal counsel straight off the bat. And that's how you would first of all start to, I think, like consciously and deliberately socialize the legal system. Because if the distinction here is I can afford an army of lawyers because I'm a fucking billionaire and you can't, and I'm going to destroy you through the legal system, that's where the bourgeois play. And that's where they win. That's like playing on their home turf. If you want to play on your home turf, you'd have to equalize the playing field a little bit. So you'd have to make it not about the money that you can amass behind you in order to take your issues through the judicial system, if that makes sense. That would be where I would start for, like, you know, how the courts would work under socialism. The minutiae of that, who knows? But like the ideals and like the objectives of that legal system, I think our legal system is a bourgeois one, and it protects bourgeois rights. And what are bourgeois rights? And I'll bring this up now because, like, this, I think this is important. A bourgeois system, the one that we have at the moment, the entire system really comes down to protecting not just bourgeois society or culture, but fundamentally bourgeois property rights. So private property.
Yeah.
It's like the entire legal system is really designed, even constitutions are really about protecting the pursuit of, you know, life, liberty, and property.
Yes.
So life, so you can exist in a market system. Liberty, so you can freely engage in the market. And property, so you can own stuff and control it to the exclusion of all others. And so the entire judicial system really is predicated on protecting people's property rights.
Yes.
Not protecting people. And so a socialized, like, or a judicial system under socialism, or the courts under socialism, would be actually about sorting out the protection of humans.
Yes.
People. Now, what we have at the moment is we have these, like, this beautiful thing called the UN, and like basically a charter of human rights, and everyone signed up to it, but no one really takes it seriously. And so I would argue that in a socialist system, you wouldn't be, like, property rights would still be important, but they would be secondary to human rights. And so a socialized judicial system would actually protect fundamental human rights first. First of all, if we actually care about human life, first of all, do people have access to food and water and shelter?
Yes.
Do they have the freedom of expression? Do they have an opportunity to have access to the things that make for a dignified human existence, like access to electricity in the modern age, access to the internet, access to the basic utilities?
Yes.
Like heating, even. Like, you know, like temperature regulation, let's say, especially in a world that might go a bit crazy with climate change and erratic weather conditions. Like, do people have the right to a dignified existence? I think the judicial system, instead of protecting property rights, would be all about protecting human rights first. And then property rights would be secondary to that. Because a bourgeois system is really a system based on protecting bourgeois property, which is private property in the sense of, like, you know, means of production, like businesses, basically, things in the economy. It's all really fundamentally boils down to that. And so, like, I think a justice system under socialism would protect humans and value primarily human rights.
Yeah, because, like, even you bringing up the UN, there's even a more recent example of all of that stuff that's going on with Gaza and is not rail. Like, what was it? The UN recently has, you know, crossed its T and dotted its I's, and it came out and it's like, yeah, we checked the criteria, and yes, what is happening in Gaza is a G word. It's a genocide. And, like, even with that, like, I guess if the UN actually, like, say they were a world government, and, you know, everything started from the world government, and, you know, I guess sovereignty worked down from there. So you had the world government to national governments to state governments and then to local government. You, like, if it actually had proper sovereignty, then in it's saying like, oh, I checked the criteria and that is a genocide, and now is not rail. You're going to stop exactly what you're doing and we've got our UN police and all of that business, and we're going to make sure you stop it. So stop it now. Then, if it had any sovereignty, then I'm sure is not rail would be like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll stop doing it because you told us to. But, good old BB and the boys, saw what they said and was like, yeah, we're going to keep on doing what we're going to do.
Yeah. And everybody fundamentally knows that, that what they should be doing. I think everybody agrees on that. Like Epstein, Luigi. I think most working class people around the world, right wing and left wing now, are just like, yep, killing children on the scale of hundreds of thousands of them is fucked up.
Yeah.
It's wrong.
Yeah. But there is no world government sovereignty, or at least not one that obstructs national sovereignty. So Is Not Rail is doing what Is Not Rail is doing. Apparently they're supposed to be in a ceasefire, and there's been little scuffles here and there. So is the ceasefire even still exists? Who knows? But at least I also want to bring the conversation back to, because I'm actually reading a book on the Paris Commune at the moment. And look, I totally get where you're coming from with what you're saying, where if you were to bring more human rights to a legal system, and one that was focusing much more on human rights, hey, even in the Paris Commune, they kind of melded all the separation of powers together and established committees on whatever the issue was, and they kind of went from there and asking the people, or asking the various committees of how to do things. Because how the Paris Commune was even started is that they had the National Guard there in Paris, and the Versailles government, and I think the name of the guy that was the general was Thuria, or that sort of thing. He was instructed to take the cannons from the National Guard in Paris, and he basically shifted all of the cannons up into the top of Montmartre. And the horses were going to come and take everything, but then the horses never came. So the Versailles army were just sitting there like sitting ducks when sunlight came, and then the National Guard and the rest of Paris working people were like, "Hey, they're taking our guns. Let's get them." And they had to get out of there, and that's when the people were like, "Well, screw it. The Versailles government was about to screw us, so why don't we take power since they've left?" And they let if any of the I'm pretty confident on this, but anyone that within the government that wanted to leave, they could. And I think maybe a third of the government stayed, and they got to work and they got everything back up and running again, like the sewers and education, all of that. But what was important was, if anyone kind of had an issue, they set up the various committees for that. And they set up committees for such things like women's issues, because that was the important thing about that I guess 24 to 48 hours is that the book that I was reading was describing how women and children were throwing themselves on the guns, so the Versailles army wouldn't take the guns away. And they were actually quite integral, much like the textile workers in the Russian Revolution. Women and children were actually quite integral to the Paris Commune. And I've got a direct quote here from the book, because this is the Paris Commune, A Revolution in Democracy by Donny Gluckstein. And just to kind of give you a bit of a understanding of what, well, I guess the the women, and what they actually called the workers' union for them. Let me just find it here. So, well, it's basically what they called as the women's union. So here's the direct quote. The women's union contrasted with an earlier women's association that, along with international members, included women regardless of class. The occupations of 60 of the union's core members had been ascertained, and they give a good idea of how representative it was. That there were 15 seamstresses, 9 waistcoat makers, 6 sewing machine operators, 5 dressmakers, 5 linen drapers, and it goes on and on and on. And then after that direct quote, it goes, at its height, 3 to 4,000 attended the union meetings. And then it goes on to all the various talking points of the essential reforms that it wanted to do. So, quote, the immediate and essential reforms were therefore a variety of work in each trade, a reduction in working hours, an end to all competition between male and female workers, and that the association therefore wants equal pay with equal hours of work, a local and international federation of the various trade sections in order to ease the movement and exchange of goods by centralizing the interests of producers, and the general development of their producer associations required, informing and organizing working masses to the consequences this will be of every association member that will be expecting to belong to the International Workers' Men Association. Said assistance in advancing in the necessary credit for setting up these associations, loan repayable in yearly installments at the rate of 5%. Now, the reason why that's really important is you got to take into consideration what women's rights were at that time, and we're talking about a very Catholic. A very Catholic France at that stage, where women were subservient to men, and this is also a time of what Friedrich Engels was talking about in The Origin of Family, Private Property, and the State, like the nuclear family or the monogamous family, and like just to kind of use a quick quote from that book, when he refers to it, he's actually talking about the monogamous family. And it is based on the supremacy of the man, the express purpose being to produce children of undisputed paternity. Such paternity is demanded because these children are later to come into their father's property as their natural heirs. It is distinguished from pairing at marriage by the much greater strength of the marriage tie, which can no longer be dissolved at either partner's wish. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that, well, women's issues, and I guess the woman's question, because they were so heavily involved in the Paris Commune, their issues were at the forefront, much like many other issues during the Paris Commune, because they knew that there was the Versailles government that was there for the property-making classes and the ruling classes, and then there was the people of Paris that were wanting to hold on to their cannons, wanting to hold on to make things more accessible for the working class. So they created their associations like the Women's Union, and they advocated for a much more just law for them. And I guess that's the point I'm trying to make.
So it really comes down to, I think, the participation of people in the governance of society, the running of society, which would be different under a socialist society anyway, because currently we have a system of representational government that is controlled, I think, largely by the bourgeois. Not exclusively. There are still people that are able to thanks to social mobility, move through and become part of the bourgeois political system. And so there is a bit of mobility in it, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, the politics system is run for bourgeois interests. But in a society where it's turned socialist, and I think this is an important distinction to make for anyone who's listening that might not have heard my distinction on what socialism is, it's a society where people are in control of the economy. So people that are working in the economy are making decisions. People that are working in organizations, in businesses, in governmental structures, whatever, they have a say and control over that institution. In a system where people are having control over the economy and are more integrated into the decision-making process already, they might seek justice or policy decisions or make, or, regulation decisions and organizational decisions that are already in line with their code of what they think justice should look like, their moral code on what justice should look like. And so the legal system itself, judiciary, the courts, as the original question from Ollie Atlas pertains to, would actually change itself and fashion itself towards fulfilling the directions of people who are already making policy decisions and regulations already. The thing about the Paris Commune was they literally got together, the workers, and decided on the governance of the city. And they sent delegates from the various sections of Paris to go and make the final rules and the regulations that was controlling people. And it was a delegate system too, I'm pretty sure. Yes. Not a representative one. So a delegate system is another form of very peculiar politics, because you choose someone that goes and speaks on your behalf, but a delegate is recallable. If you don't like what they're doing, you vote and you recall them straight away. So it's much more fluid, the system as well. And so if the system of decision making that informs the legislation, let's say, that also is stuff that's fought over in the courts themselves, and that's more fluid, and then that is being designed by working people for working people, already that sentiment is going to start to be reflected in the court structure anyway, as a result of that change in how policy and decision making is happening. And so reflexively, the courts will start to move towards things that represent the interests of, working people as opposed to people that control the property, let's say, like private property as such, which is what I think the bourgeois legal structure is really all about. It is a system of reinforcing the class relations and the property relations and just making sure that they hold true. So in a system where the class relations change and working people, or the people that create value, let's say, have a control and have a real say in everything, the court system itself will start to be geared towards reinforcing those interests and the interests of humans and like people that create value, as opposed to people that own things and profit off that value. It'll start to change organically in that sense. But like those people have to take the levers of power first. And I think that's the real lesson from the Paris Commune, is that they have to get in there and control things. And I think one of the critiques that Marx and Engels actually had of the Paris Commune, and you touched on this before, is that when they took over, they didn't change all of the government structures and all the levers of power. Ultimately, they still left certain people in. And because they left certain people in levers of power, that meant that they didn't have complete control over the system, and then they lost control of the system in the end. And so if you're going to change and revolutionize into some change from what we have now, bourgeois system, to a socialized system, or a capitalist system to socialism or something like that, then you actually have to go through systematically and replace everyone at the levels of power with people that have your vision, because the old power structure, the existing bourgeois system is set up to reinforce bourgeois society. And so it will replicate bourgeois society by default. And so unless you get in there and fundamentally start changing things out, gutting things out from the inside out, systematically and intentionally, then that structure, that way the courts work, will bring you back to bourgeois society. So you actually have to go through and consciously rewrite everything and gut out the old and in with the new. Now that happens over a long period of time.
Yeah.
But the old systems are there to reinforce the old society. So the only way to systematically change everything is to slowly go through. And that's what the butterfly revolution is really all about. Like Curtis Yarvin's and the Dark Enlightenment.
Yeah.
The butterfly revolution is literally about gutting the entirety of the cathedral out. So like the media, the university systems, the bureaucracy, gutting it all out, because all these are ideological foundations that continue this, as they would call it, progressive society, this liberal progressive society, this liberal progressive wonderland. And it's led us to this stagnation and like this woke death trap. And so like in order to really pull off the butterfly revolution, which is what Trump is doing in effect, is he's literally just gutting out the bureaucracies, destroying, like, you know, attacking the media with legal warfare.
Yes.
Attacking the academic institutions, like the universities are fully under attack. And if they don't comply, he sues them.
Yes.
And like he's just stacking bureaucracies with loyalists. And that's how you fundamentally take over a system, because everybody in that system they'll be replaced and they're loyal to you. And then you rewrite the systems themselves. And that's how you take full control over something. So that's how you would transition. And in the legal structure, you'd have to. Like the legal structure in the US is a shining example of this. It's not just about, you know, stacking Congress with the most Republicans, let's say, if you want to bring in Republican policy. If you really want to control the game, what you really do is you stack the Supreme Court with all of your Supreme Court justices. And so, like, if anyone tries to challenge the Constitution or you, take it to the Supreme Court, and they're all ideologically aligned with me anyway, and you're fucked. Don't worry about the Congress. Yeah, they pass laws, but who interprets the laws? Lawyers. And then who makes the final decision? Supreme Court justices. And so you'd really have to go through and dismantle that entire system and start replacing them with people that understand what is required in a new society, which is one based, I would say, on human rights, not property rights, and the culture wars.
But like, even to go back to the example we were using before with the Paris Commune, like, I guess to use maybe a modern example of a model example of what they were trying to achieve, like, say, the women's unions in the Paris Commune, like, I would say, you know, the issues that Engels was tackling in the origins of the family, private property, and the state, like, the whole point of, I guess, the monogamous relationship and the emphasis on property rights is the value and the importance of property rights, but also the devaluing of social production. Because I guess once you control the movements, and you know exactly that your heirs are the ones that are going to your heirs are actually your sons, they're your genetic code, then there's a clear line of progression. Because, like, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't he go into this whole thing about you know, before that common idea about private property in liberal democratic societies, in bourgeois culture, you know, once we were existing in much more collective societies, it was the you know, things were determined by the maternal line rather than the paternal line. Correct?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and so like the society was structured around the matriarch more because people knew who their mothers were.
Yes,
because everybody saw it. I saw where you came out of, like, kind of thing.
Yeah. So I guess if we live in a society that you know, values your production or your working capacity within society, and devalues devalue social production. Like one of the founding things that came out of World War II was, I guess, heuristically, it was the father of the nuclear family that was the breadwinner, and it was the mum that was caring for child rearing and social production that was at home. But, we now exist in the 21st century where as a minimum, you kind of need two incomes in order for a household or a nuclear family is to survive. So the mum's kind of putting in a double shift. So, not only is she also being an income for the family, but also she's probably the primary caregiver that is at home. So I would like to think if there was a women's union in a Paris Commune style in the 21st century, I think one of the first concerns that I guess the committee for women in that regard would be probably free childcare, or at least affordable childcare to actually put a common playing field if women do want to work, so they're not having to put in an extra shift or that sort of thing.
Yes.
If you understand my line of reasoning.
Yeah, 100%. Because like in a bourgeois society, the legal structure, the economy is built around ensuring people get what they need from the market. And so social production is secondary to other forms of production, so value creation, so industrial production at the moment. It's secondary to that because if you want social production, that will be supplied by the market. And so if you need to create humans and family structures and communities that help create more humans, you can do all of that stuff, but like they find whatever they need on the market. So like they buy their food, they buy their houses, they buy their clothes, they buy their education, they buy services like childcare and health services on the market. And so in a system where the judicial arm and the courts and like all of the legislation, so all of the regulation of society is actually geared towards human rights as opposed to the property rights that allow everything to be catered for in the market, but it's actually human rights, you would actually have a legal system structured in a way that ensures society is upholding social production. Because the human right of everybody needing clean drinking water, everyone needing access to healthcare, everyone needing a home, electricity, the internet, like all of these services that are fundamental to a high living standard, and living standard, aka social production, how you reproduce more humans to ensure your society continues, that sort of stuff will be not primarily adjudicated through property rights, but through human rights. And so the focus being on making sure humans are accounted for, then you can have your market. Don't get me wrong, markets are still important. They've been with humans for as long as we've had complex societies or even engaged with other humans from other communities. We've had some level of marketization. The market can still exist, but it's secondary or after social production, as you're describing. And I think a focus on ensuring human rights as opposed to property rights would be a way to ensure we're focusing on social production. Because what I think is happening at the moment and what people are finding, and that's why there's a big discussion about, cost of living issues, housing crisis, inflation, like all these things directly expose the crisis at the moment that capitalism is failing social production. So outside of how we produce value, produce consumer goods, how do we actually also produce people too? And if people can't afford on the market to create more humans, or at least give them a high enough living standard that we've now come accustomed to, then the market system is starting to fail social production. And so that might be actually the type of stuff that pushes people towards a society that they start to focus on those rights as above property rights. Maybe that's the thing that gets working people at the end of the day, or the large majority of people out there, when they start to realize that the way the society works is not allowing them to just simply reproduce themselves and like their families, their loved ones, the next generation. Because without replicating humanity in the form of reproducing and bringing on the next generation, the entire human race stops. And there's no point for property rights. You can have all the property you want, but if everyone dies in the next generation or two, it's pointless. It's completely pointless. And it might be a crisis that we're experiencing now in social production, in a market system, that spurs on a discussion about whether we need a new focus or not.
Okay. Well, I feel like that was a pretty good point to end the podcast on. And with that, that brings us to our last segment. You know what's coming, MysterE. What's that synthwave art? What do you think the prompt for this one is?
It is blind socialist justice. They all look blind because they've got glasses on. And
okay, so the prompt... Yeah.
No,
yeah, go for it.
Please tell me. No, tell me.
Okay,
please.
so the prompt is judges in the court working with legislators in order to bring in human rights into a socialist society against capitalist hegemony.
Interesting. So, like, you had it in the prompt. The idea of property rights versus human rights. There it is.
Yes.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah, but there's still the eagle in the background, so I wonder if... Is that an American eagle? I don't know.
I don't know what's going on there.
But, yeah, everyone has shades in there, so yes.
Blind justice.
Have we made all the lawyers blind? What's going on there?
Yeah. No, they're all Ray Charles.
Okay, and with that, Ollie Atlas, I hope we answered your question sufficiently today. And remember, everyone, to keep thinking and keep learning. And to sign us off, I'll give it to you, MysterE.
Thank you very much, 4AS. And to all of you out there, please remember, like, share, subscribe for more. And until next time, I am, you are, we are, a MysterE.